Good morning, dear colleagues. I would like to offer you a presentation, a neural network for counting seals on ice using digital photographs. The topic of this presentation is very close to the presentation that I made in 2018 at our previous conference. And I have to say with pleasure that this year I have now counted 5 presentations that cover neural networks. Well, first of all, I'd like to explain why we try to use neural networks for counting seals. The visual identification of seals is very complicated and it takes a lot of time. On this slide, you can see a digital photograph made during an aerial survey at one of the breeding areas in the White Sea in 2013. The size of this picture is 6.71 megabyte, and the size of the area that was taken is 111 by 172 meters at the altitude of 250 meters. During this aerial survey, 16,000 such photographs were made. And as a result of the visual evaluation, we have identified 2,609 adult seals and 1,199 young seals. The overall time of processing for an experienced researcher is several months. As you can understand, this is a very labor-intense process. And if you look at this particular spot on the photograph, this is a fragment of the photograph I'm showing you. It's 100% scaled. Here, a researcher needs to identify adult seals and young seals. As you can see, it is very difficult. Red shows adult seals, blue shows young seals. Adult seals are easier to determine visually, but with young seals it is much more difficult. They often have white color, and the uneven snow can be taken for a young seal. We used multispectral methods of aerial photography and photographic processing. So we took pictures in the visual range, but also in the infrared range. And then by applying both photographs on top of each other, we could identify whether a specific spot is a young seal or some kind of an unevenness on the snow. In order to automate this identification process, we believe that a neural network can be used. I'm going to tell you about the neural network that we trained in order to count seals. Our main task here was to automatically recognize specific objects in large sets of photographs. I think that the stages of training can be divided into several stages. First of all, we need to determine the object of identification. What is it that we're looking for, and what are the characteristic features that can be looked for recognition? Then we create a neural network, we train the neural network, and then we apply the neural network. On this slide, you can see the various objects that we were interested in. in various ice breeding sites. In order to select the features of these objects, we needed to select a number of photographs. We put them in the database and then determine specific characteristics. On this slide, you can see selected photos, selected samples. This is a young seal. This is a cavity, and 2 adult seals in sunny weather and in a darker day without sun on the right-hand side below. In order to select the characteristics that would help you to later recognize the images, we have developed a software module. This module makes it possible to look for specific characteristics of seals. On the slide, you can see an image of an adult seal on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, a histogram of the distribution of color characteristics. We have red, green, and blue separately. In order to process this further, we determine the brightness of green color, the minimum, and the maximum brightness, which covers the entire silhouette of the seal. In the same case, we can make the calculations for the area of this image in pixels. It's 613 pixels in this particular case. We can calculate the perimeter, 131 pixels, and the form factor, which is 0.44. I'm going to explain this a little bit later. After that, as we analyzed the selected samples and determined color characteristics for red, green, and blue, we were able to determine the minimum and maximum parameters of the brightness of red, for example, green, and of blue colors. We can determine the minimum and maximum area of the color spot in red, green, and blue. And we can also make the calculation for the so-called form factor. This is where we use the so-called Polsby-Popper test. You can see the formula here on the slide. This is a relation 4 pi by the area divided by the perimeter square. This may be 1 for a circle, because then you divide by the perimeter squared, and then you get 1 for a full circle. But all the other formats, all the other forms have a different factor. The circle is the full, most compact form. For a square, this compact factor is 0.78, which is half of pi. The smaller the form factor, the longer, the more elongated is the form of whatever figure we are analyzing. And using this form factor, we can get rid of different cracks and crevices that may match our characteristics in terms of color, but do not match the form factor because they are much, much longer. In this particular case, we can also determine the minimum and maximum parameters for each color. And all this data is saved as a file. At the next stage, we have to identify specific objects. I have 5 minutes left. Okay, very well. We have to determine the specific objects that match the parameters, that match the ranges that have been determined for the brightness, for the area of the color spot, for the form factor, etc. This can also be written as a vector here, and the formula is indicated on the slide. So you put here all those parameters, and then we take these parameters as 1. If they match, if there is a match, it is 1. If it is no match, it's 0. And the vector will be written in this form. You have several zeros and several ones. So how do we create a neural network? We now have all the necessary data in order to build a neural network. We mostly work with binary data here, and our main task is to recognize seals to determine whether it is a seal or not. Then it is possible to use the simplest neural network. At the input, you will be getting the data that we have selected, 0 or 1, whether or not there is a match for all those parameters that we determined earlier, then the weight, and we sum it up and activate a neural network. In order to calculate the sum total, we use the formula on the top. In order to activate the network, I'm using the threshold function. And as soon as the threshold is passed, then the new network decides that the picture matches, the picture can be identified as a seal. Here are several photographs of using a neural network that has not been trained. We just take specific parameters individually. And you can see how neural network recognized some of the seals. The one was not covered by the network. And then this particular picture, for instance, this is a crevice, or maybe just a shadow. There's another shadow. It is not a seal. This is another picture. This is a hole out of seals, and a lot of mistakes can be seen here, a lot of errors. But this is where we used some of the early identifiers. But even then, we count most of the seals, but a lot of errors can be seen. This is a bigger picture, and you can see that sometimes they are double counted. Some of the seals were not covered. They were not seen by the neural network as adult seals. In some cases, some kind of a mark that was recognized, which is not a seal. This is another picture that shows you an intermediary stage. You can see red spots, intense red spots. These are true images of seals, and they're recognized as seals by the network. In order to train the neural network, I use the trainer method. This is a schematic of how this is working. We have a sample of training material. We have a result of the neural network processing. Then the trainer gives a response, feedback, and if the mark is satisfied, then the network is trained. If not, then it goes back to the previous stage. In conclusion, I would like to say that neural networks are a very powerful tool that make it possible to automate the processing of large sets of data to identify and count marine mammals at big in big aerial survey photographs. I think it is the use of neural network is quite promising for forecasting of the state of populations of marine mammals, depending on various factors of their environment. And as I always say, we need to apply neural networks for the research of marine mammals, and we need to try and attract more experts in neural networks, those people who deal with neural networks on a professional basis, those who build them, develop them, and train them so that we could apply these networks to our work at a higher scale.